maybe we're rolling with it. Ooh. Wow, that was magical. Thank you all for your patience. If you're here for a Just World as Possible Environmental Leaders Speak, you're in the right place. If you're not here for that, just stick around because it'll be good, I think. Thank you. I practiced that joke, Quinn. I just want to say.
Very casual.
Yeah. So I'm Casey. I work for Oregon Wild, and I'm here today with an amazing group of people who are going to share with us a little bit about their organization and how they're approaching the next 4 years and how their work has changed or hasn't changed and how they keep themselves rooted in their values and their organization's mission, even amongst, I was going to use profanity about it, but I guess it's a big old pile of shit that's raining down on us by cruel people who are hurting our friends and neighbors and family, and maybe even some of you, and are scaring lots of people. And I know well, or kind of well, all the folks on here, and they're all really people who are inspiring to me about how they live their lives and live their missions in a really an amazing way. And I know that a lot of you, I don't know really, well, I know like 3 of you in the room, so I should be honest. I know some of you in the room, and I know that you're also like that. And my hope is that today we can leave here having learned a little bit about their organizations and what they're working on, or the environmental champion in the room who doesn't have an organization, and then also how we can join them, but also feel a little bit inspired and maybe cry a little bit. So with the short version of intros is that we have with us today Quinn Reed, the Executive Director of Oregon Wild. You can clap for her. Yeah! We have Kristen Anderson Ostrom, who from Oregon Rural Action. Yay! We have Brian Smith from the Tribal Democracy Project. Damon Montstory from Oregon chapter of Sierra Club. And we have Representative Courtney Neron, who represents your staff say Wilsonville, Kings City, and Sherwood. We can clap for her too. So we're going to open it up for questions after the panelists talk a little bit about what their work is and how it's changed in response to the Trump administration. And I have a lot of questions for them, but I hope that all of us can really take to heart how we get through all of this together. So with that, I'm going to open it up to Quinn.
Yeah. Actually, can you all hear me okay without the mic? Yeah. Okay.
Because yeah.
Gesture.
Oh, yes. Can we do?
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in amplified sound because I have tractor ears.
No, it's fine. I can hold it.
Oh no, you can. I'm telling my boss what to do right now, so this is awkward. But what we're gonna do, you can hold this gesture if you want, and it's gonna be great.
It's gonna be amazing. Is that better? No.
Turn it on. Thank you for your patience with us.
Yeah. Can I put it in here? Will that work? All right. Anything.
You can try it again.
Is this it?
We'll do this one. Thank you for your patience.
Okay. Ooh, we're back. All right.
Thank you all for being here this morning. So I have to confess that when Casey invited me to be on this panel a couple of weeks ago, my first reaction was, yeah, sounds exciting. And then the anxiety started to set in, because I thought, oh, am I expected to have answers? and in typical me form, it was, well, surely by PIELC, I will have all of the answers. So even last night I was talking to a colleague about this panel, and I said, I've still got like 12 hours to really get it all situated. So I regret to inform you that I do not have all of the answers. You know, in many ways I feel like I'm stumbling, but I also feel like I'm stumbling in community, which, hey, if that's where we're at, I will take it. And I also thought, Okay, maybe I don't have all the answers right now, but what a great opportunity to be in conversation with people doing all of this important work from many different angles to be able to navigate this together. So I'm really excited about this conversation. So just a little bit about my background in Oregon Wild. I actually started this organization as a career changer in 2013. So came in part-time, very entry-level, very bright-eyed. I had a journal. I kept my journals from when I was a kid, which is truly mortifying. But I have this entry from when I was just on the cusp of 13 of life goals. And one of those goals was, and I quote, to have a dramatic impact on the outcome of the environment. What the hell does that even mean? But I think that there was an earnestness behind that, right, that I was taking into this work. Like I wanted to make a difference. You know, I felt that importance from a very young age. And so being in Oregon Wild was such a wonderful opportunity to learn the tools of the trade and to be part of this mission that I really, really believed in, which is to protect Oregon's wildlands, wildlife, and waters as a legacy for future generations, right? I came into it wholeheartedly, yes, and energetic, and it felt great. You know, in the years that followed, I worked for several different partner organizations, many if not all of whom are represented at PIELC today. It was kind of awesome to see that community grow, and all of whom I respect and admire. And I returned as ED just 6 weeks ago, and hell of a time to lead an organization doing this kind of work, especially because all of those tools that I learned, you know, starting in 2013, are now being systematically dismantled. So as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking, how do we even do our work? You know, all the things that I've learned, all of the habits for better or worse, right, that I've developed, are they relevant anymore? How do we reimagine how we approach this work? So that's a little bit of where my head is at right now. And, you know, I feel in this moment really angry. I feel extraordinarily sad, bewildered often, and unmoored. Unmoored is probably the one that sticks with me the most. And it's a very unsettling feeling, but I think a lot of exciting growth can come from being unmoored or untethered. And you know, today, I think Oregon Wild's mission resonates with me even more deeply. You know, as I think about our values and our identity as an organization, I think about, you know, our fighting spirit and how much that buoys me in these times. You know, I think about tenacity and persistence. You know, if we're really lucky, our work is that of months, one legislative session, if you're really lucky, sometimes of a couple of years, but really our work is that of generations. And that far outlasts the nonsense of this one bullshit regime, and that gives me hope. And being part of an organization that embodies that to its core feels great to me. So again, as I'm thinking about leadership in this moment, I'm also thinking about community. Being a part of a community and recognizing our role in that, supporting our community and working in community. And these things are no longer, you know, sometimes I think for better or for worse, you know, our organizations can get into go it alone attitudes. Not always, Oregon Wild, it's fair to say at times has done that. That's not a luxury we can indulge, right? Working in community is an imperative. And nature, you know? In this moment, protecting nature for its own sake and for ours, I implore you in moments of despair, if you are feeling unmoored or untethered, to go outside, whatever that means to you. If you can get out of the wilderness, great. But for me, that's Reed Canyon in Portland, you know, right down the street, to just spend time listening to a stream for a minute. And it grounds me and returns me to the purpose. So again, I think this moment is scary as we're watching our institutions be unmade. but it is an opportunity for us to reimagine how we put things back together when sanity is restored. And it will be, because we are all working so hard to ensure that it is. But we can't squander this opportunity, right? And I think that our opponents are counting on that. So again, as I look to Oregon Wild in the coming years, I want to be sure that we're caring for one another, that as we think about protecting nature, we're also protecting our hearts, our collective hearts and minds, so that we have the energy and the brain space and the creativity to do that work, to envision what comes next and how we put things back together. So with that, I will turn it over, and I'm so excited to hear from all of these leaders in the community.
Thank you so much. And at Kristen's request, I realized I skipped over this. Can you raise your hand if you consider yourself a law school student? Okay. Oh, look at this, well segregated. If you don't actually, you could just consider yourself that. Raise your hand if you have some legal background already. Awesome. Raise your hand if you consider Eugene your community. Ooh, wow, awesome. How about some other place in Oregon? Awesome. How about someplace not in Oregon? Yeah, wow, awesome. Is that good, Kristen?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, thank you for the reminder. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Representative Courtney Miron.
So we're going in order of the
Oh, yes, that's right. We're going in order of the slides because we have to have some order. We'll get some of those questions after.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's legislative session, so really anything you say is amazing.
Is it okay if I stand?
Please.
Let me hold up behind things back here. Hi everyone, I'm Courtney Miron. I am a state representative. I serve the communities of kind of outer southwest Portland suburbs. So if you know Sherwood, Tigard, Wilsonville, King City. If you just know I-5, it's when your car slows down as you're going over the Willamette River up to the Mercedes dealership. Okay. But we are, and I grew up in Tigard, so I'm an Oregon kid. I went to U of O in the late 90s. And so right now I've been serving. Oh, thank you. That's really helpful. I've been serving since 2019 in the Oregon legislature, but I kind of want to start at what motivated me to step into that role. I am a career high school French and Spanish teacher, and really felt, and I was a mom of 2 kids, raising kids in a time of the Parkland shooting, of climate change, and really feeling like I wanted to make sure that I was impacting their world and the world of my students as well. So I left the classroom in 2018 and ran for office in a swing seat and was able to flip my district for the first time, kind of unexpectedly. And so I've been really committed to holding it as best I can. I actually think I'm a pretty accurate representation of what I kind of call a soccer mom district, although I'm a theater mom. And I really do care a lot about the communities I represent, having watched them grow and change. But I also feel really committed to the future of Oregon and our policies and making sure that I'm leaving the world a better place than I found it. I currently serve as the chair of the Education Committee, and I serve on our Energy and Environment Committee, as well as our Consumer Protections Committee. And I love that committee work. I've served on a wide variety of committees, and we do a lot of our work in committee in the legislature. And so I'm in my 4th term. Right now I was just re-elected in 2024. And have been serving as the co-vice chair of the Environmental Caucus for quite a few years. So I've tracked a bit of our environmental legislation, and I have my own focuses as well, which I put together a few more slides. This is kind of my mission statement you asked for back there. I don't know if I should go to that at all. I have found that a lot of legislators have a lot of success when they find a niche and try to fill that niche. And where I have found that my passions align with where somebody is needed is in the intersection of environmental policy and health. And so I've done a lot of work with pesticide safety, toxins in our products, air quality, everything from leaf blower conversations to Toxic Free Kids Act. And now we're heading into a session where we're going to be doing a huge transportation package. So I'll be really talking about safe routes to schools, walkable communities, multimodal transportation, for example. And so this is some of my work in past sessions and work that we've done broadly that I'm really proud of. In my first session, 2019, we passed a bill that allowed us to attach to federal environmental policies that were in 2017, essentially keeping our environmental policies strong through the first Trump administration. And I should say that Trump was really one of my main motivators for running in the first place as well. And teaching in a classroom in 2016 was horrific, and it's only amplified since then. So if you want to read a few of these things up here, kind of, I think I'm most proud of things like the Toxic Free Kids Act, making sure that the OHA can insist that certain chemicals of concern are not in our kids' products. And we extended that to toxic-free cosmetics, and we're trying to do toxic-free schools now as well. I think I'll move on because it's a long list. Currently, I'm working on quite a few things. I really want to be doing a zero-emission school bus assistance fund. Phasing out PFAS is a really big emphasis this session, as well as studying the Oregon story of where do we have PFAS with a biosolids study. I'm trying to take on chemicals in school lunches so that when we are investing in nutrition for our kiddos, we're investing in things that actually help them grow and thrive. And making sure that our pesticide applicators in the state of Oregon have access to training in a language that they can understand. And currently Oregon relies on the state of Washington for a lot of its pesticide applicator training in Spanish. So putting together a program in Oregon to make sure that we have that. Oops. And then making sure that we're improving our awareness of chemicals in our environment. I think the first step for the menstrual products and diapers is actually just a labeling concept. So we'll be looking into that. And then I'm also really interested in the intersection of food waste and climate. So making sure that we have uniform date and labeling is one of my pushes. Which can reduce the amount of things that have to be thrown away. It's easier to understand. Some people look at best by, use by, sell by all differently. So making sure there's uniform date and labeling. And then expanding our composting programs in the state of Oregon. So really focused on that this session. Was there more that you wanted me to say in my intro?
Yeah, I think how has the how has the this new Trump administration, the 6 weeks? Wait, 6 weeks? Because you were about the same time, 5 weeks. How is it shifting where you're looking at here, at least this session and beyond?
Yeah, and I hope we talk a little bit more about that as we spend time together today. This has motivated me even more. It's devastating. I cried in the car on the way here this morning, right? Because there's so much that I care about that's at risk. I was motivated by Trump in 2016 and continue to be motivated to stand up to him. I generally don't love conflict, pretty peaceful and calm, but this is me being angry, actually, is running for office. So I go every day and I try to make sure that our policies reflect what I want to make sure we're standing up for, and doing that ideally in the most diplomatic way possible. I think today the tears were about how disgraceful yesterday's press conference was and the lack of dignity that our leadership models, and making sure that I'm one of those people that upholds that. We do have a lot of bipartisanship still in the Oregon State House, and I'm glad for that, but increasingly it's felt at risk. And so I guess I'll just say, I think about something that our current Department of Education leader told us she's thinking about and centering right now, and that is she learned about how gazelles, when there's a threat, surround the young and put them at the center. And right now I feel like we have a lot of vulnerable Oregonians that we have to put in our center and make sure that the Trump administration does the least amount of harm. And so I feel a responsibility to stand up for what I believe in and make sure that vulnerable Oregonians are not increasingly impacted by that. Sometimes it is an exercise in optimism, and once, on a very devastating day in my first term, one of our good friends, Megan, me, what better person than a teacher to get up and try again tomorrow, right? So I kind of come at that every day, like we have to keep trying, and we don't always get it, and sometimes this ship is real hard to turn around. Funding is at risk. I'm very scared about the Bonneville Power Administration laying off so many people. Our transmission needs to be invested in, and right now we're going to have an increasingly difficult time getting solar energy to where it needs to be if we can't invest in transmission. And meeting our energy goals then is at risk. So I think that's something I'll highlight for the room. And then, standing up against threats like the advanced clean trucks should never have had a hearing. And so many people have introduced bills about nuclear energy. I have great concerns about that. But I think I'll speak, as I close, I'll speak to something that Quinn brought up, and that's the work of community being so important. It's not only the leaders who are elected who matter right now, it's actually working in community and realizing that we all play a role, whether we understand them or not. Like it's everyone right now, all hands on deck. And that our work will outlast generations and last generations. I really believe in what you said. And kind of at the same essence of the energy you brought, I think about and I have it on my fridge because it brings me peace, a poem by Wendell Berry, The Peace of Wild Things. When the despair for the world grows in me and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lay down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought or grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world, and I am free. And I really believe that we need to be operating in where we have that locus of control and taking care of ourselves, because this is a marathon, not a sprint. So working in community, making sure we're able to sustain the long time that we will be doing this work, and taking care of each other and ourselves as we try to show up every day to make sure that there is peace and space for all things.
Well, Chris, I totally have to just add one thing, is that thank you, and I was fighting crying, so appreciate it. But also you referenced our dear friend Megan, and everybody needs a Megan. Like every person who sits on a dais, every person, like these folks who are leaders of organizations also need a Megan. It's just like a badass person who will do the hard work and then be there for you. And like, this is really hard. So just want to, oh yeah.
The good news is I think she's multiple people because she always answers the phone. So maybe there's a Megan for everybody.
We're like fighting for this to talk about Megan. Okay, thank you, Brandon.
Hi everybody, my name is Brian Smith, AT and pronouns. I'm a citizen from the Muskogee Nation out of Oklahoma. I grew up in Arizona, but I've lived in Oregon for about 25 years now. My background has been in electoral politics. I think I started running my first campaigns in around 2006. And that kind of led me on this journey to co-found an organization called Tribal Democracy Project, we're pretty new. Just to get into that history, the organization, it is rooted in community, in the Warm Springs tribal community, which is the largest tribal community in Oregon, just over the Cascades, over in Jefferson County. The reason we formed, I got the opportunity to work with a group of folks from Warm Springs in the electoral format. I think it goes back to 2021, where I worked with a group of women from the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs who wanted to get involved in local politics at the special district level. So we're talking about school boards, parks and rec, education service districts. And this is a community. Jefferson is probably, I think it is the most diverse community in Oregon, but it's very rural. Given the voter disenfranchisement for tribal and Latino communities there's actually, the boards don't reflect who the community is. So a lot of voter disenfranchisement, a lot of gerrymandering, issues with the electoral formats on getting elected there. So in this context, with these folks, we put together a pretty robust get out the vote and turned out Warm Springs in record numbers for the contest. They turned out higher than any precinct in Jefferson County. And with that, we got, I think, half of the folks on the slate elected to local office. And then we immediately moved with the other co-founder, Jalen Selva, and she is from the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, who does a lot of work in community there. We worked on redistricting after that, because that was the big thing in 2021. So together, she facilitated tribal community input throughout the state. My job was to submit maps to the legislature, which is what you do in Oregon. The congressional map important, but what was really important to us is the legislative map with 60 House seats. So through that process, that was kind of an introduction to electoral reform. Outcome was bad, I think, for tribal communities, and 3 or 4 racially gerrymandered. But since then, we were like, okay, there are a number of things we've learned when it comes to civic engagement, candidate work. First off, there has to be a level playing field. People have to be able to get elected in the first place. Voter preferences have to show. So we're like, why do we keep going to political action committees to do this, raising major candidates? We should form an organization, a nonprofit. So we formed Tribal Democracy Project because of that. And for about 2 years ago, we were fiscally sponsored, and kind of still are, through Common Cause Education Fund, and we've now just formed a 501c4 to kind of continue this work. So we're still in our infancy. But I think the next slide is kind of what has been our mission statement for Tribal Democracy Project. Our focus over the last couple of years is really defining what good electoral reforms look like from not just a tribal sovereignty perspective, but also a marginalized community perspective. So it really allowed us to figure out our values and how that applies to these reforms. So we have done a lot of work with redistricting as far as codifying those principles. We work with the National Congress of American Indians, U.S. Congress on some congressional reports, and Common Cause with that. And also highly involved with choice voting and proportional representation, along with civics engagement in tribal communities. And that part's not my area, it's other folks in the organization, but really the emphasis is if folks who, from tribal communities who, rightfully so, distrust American institutions and colonial institutions and don't want to engage, well, remember they do engage when it's important, or the system actually works, right? The same tribal community, Warm Springs, we know that in tribal elections we've seen turnout as high as 80%, right? So this isn't a disengaged group, right? The question is, do they trust the system, and is it a system that actually works? But back to kind of a big piece of our work the past couple of years is a focus on, with folks in community, what does tribal sovereignty mean, right? What are your treaty rights? What does that mean? What is your tribal constitution in your government? How does that work? And then we feel like once you have an understanding of that, now we can make that connecting piece on policy at the federal, state, and local level, why it's important, why you need to engage. And at the same time, how are we forming these systems so when you do engage, your votes aren't wasted, right? So that's kind of where we were the past couple of years, and now as we're growing up, we're becoming more engaged. For instance, right now we're actively involved in school board elections in Central Oregon. We will be doing kind of lobby days at the end of April, and we have our agenda going forward with the state legislature. We're still moving forward with electoral reforms locally, right? We've seen nationwide kind of a backlash to electoral reform, and we think the strategy is always to do this locally, whether it's local districts, city councils, commissions, to more proportionate format. And this kind of gets into some things that hopefully I can touch on later when it comes to the conceptions on what this urban-rural divide is. Let's see. Then obviously we're going to continue to advocate for tribal sovereignty and what that looks like at the state and local level. So, I think there's anything else? Yeah, I think that's great.
Thank you, Brian. And then, Brian, I will ask you a question to talk more about urban and rural divide. Let's talk it.
All right, good morning. I wanted to spend a little bit of time this morning talking about everyday people and organizing. And just make the statement and offer some evidence that there is power in everyday people coming together across significant differences, and we have significant differences now, to collectively build power for systemic change. My name is Kristen Ostrom. I'm the Executive Director of Oregon Rural Action. And we are people in Eastern Oregon, very diverse groups of people in Eastern Oregon, who are organizing for the well-being of our rural communities and the environment. And I wanted to list a bunch of faces for you all, but I just chose one picture. These are our Hispanic farm worker leaders on our water campaign. And just share with you, look at their stance. They're together and they're organizing and working with their counterparts who are Anglo, working class folks. Many folks voted for the current administration, coming together because they have a direct impacted experience with contaminated wells in Eastern Oregon. Maybe head to the next slide. So our staff and our community members are from Eastern Oregon, Hispanic farm workers, Anglo working class, ranchers, and small farmers. And we have been able to move the dial in 3 years on a very difficult problem. Anybody hear about the nitrate contamination in Eastern Oregon? Yay! All right, 3 years ago, no one knew. Okay? The state knew. The sources, industrial agricultural sources, knew. We had a state law preventing it. And when we found the contamination, to restore it. And the people who were drinking the water did not know. It was not until 2022, the March of 2022, 3 years now this month, that we began to go door to door to test domestic wells. And in going door to door, we had conversations with people. And people told us they didn't know that their water was bad. That if they suspected the water was bad, something that they brought with them from other countries, let's boil the water. So they were boiling the water, which made it worse. And then they were self-disclosing health impacts. Miscarriages after miscarriage, thyroid, cancers. And we said, can we test your well? And then we went back to their door and told them what their well numbers were. They were 3, 4, 5, 6 times the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act, which is 10 milligrams per liter. They were shocked. I remember one woman, I was with one of our organizers, Zaya Sanchez. She was delivering the information in Spanish, and she was pregnant, 9 months pregnant, and her face just turned blank. She had been drinking the water. She had made it this far, but she was scared to death for her child. The child was born okay, but there were many others in neighborhoods who had miscarriages and had health impacts that were not good. These folks came together. After conversations door to door, they started organizing, meeting in house meetings. First of all, the Hispanic community and the Anglo community separately, and then we brought folks together. And all of our meetings now are in 2 languages. And we've put together ground rules, and you've got, at the beginning, Hispanic folks saying, why are those Anglos so angry? And they're coming in here wearing their Trump hats. And I'm scared of them, and I'm not going to speak up. And you had the Anglo folks who were making sure the machinery of industrial agriculture was going and had built the roads. We're saying, who are these Hispanic people? We don't know. But what's going on here? Took a number of meetings, and we now have ground rules where you have an Anglo person who waits for his turn to speak rather than jumping right in, and someone who says, Governor Kotek, if you're coming out here and you're going to require criminal background checks on all of us, that's not going to work for our neighbors. And we need Paolo to speak because he's our best speaker. Some incredible transformations individually and collectively as a group as they come together because they are directly impacted with their contaminated wells. We have moved the dial, starting with 2022 door-to-door testing, and then 2023 we had tours of the area with Senator Merkley, EPA Regional Administrator. Finally, the governor decided to come out, and she took a tour, as well as some state legislators. And we take a tour of the area, neighborhoods that you would consider third world neighborhoods. I remember when Senator Berkeley first came, he came in a larger car, and we had to explain to him, you need to be careful because some of these roads, the holes are so deep in these roads, it'll take a minute to come out again on this side. We had tours with Berkeley, EPA, the governor, legislators, and then stories. People telling their stories. Have anybody seen the Tainted Water series? Yeah? Okay, I think we are up, this is KGW, runs Tainted Water series. I think we are up to like 25, 26 segments now of the Tainted Water series. We began to work with them. We said we need to have them tell the stories from the community's perspective. And they've done an excellent job of telling the stories from community members about what their needs are and how we need to make change. And then in 2024, we did meetings and public comments, working with community members to understand the difficult permitting process and to make public comments. And we successfully did so. Okay, next slide. Sorry, I'm getting really dry here. Had some significant wins. The LaGuama was set up in 1990 when they discovered the nitrate contamination. That's a local stakeholder committee. Oregon is really good at bringing together stakeholders for problem solving. And they did so in this particular case as well. However, all the stakeholders were the sources. Those are the sources were the stakeholders and then local government. And it's local government that supports the industry in continuing to expand. And so one of the most significant wins at the beginning was to have 2 public seats on that LaGuama committee. And then we were successful in getting the Oregon Health Authority to move from the paradigm of its individual responsibility to handle your well to no, we will set up a program for free testing, bottled water, and treatment where it makes sense under the sink. And then this last year, successfully having the state establish the nitrate reduction plan. Unfortunately, is basically a re-articulation of state law. So the good news is we've gone from nothing to see here, moving the dial, nothing to see here, to we've got this. And now our challenge is to have all of these folks continue to work together to move forward, working with other organizations across the state, up to 30 other organizations supporting us, in order to put the details into that nitrate reduction plan, so it's more than just a plan for a plan. The next slide. We were able to leverage the 1989 Oregon Groundwater Protection Act, which says let's prevent this contamination and restore it. Able to leverage the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. Law students, the Safe Drinking Water Act has an emergency authority for the federal government to step in when the state is failing to protect public health. It's been a very important leverage in getting us this far. We regularly work with the EPA, regional administrator, let them know what's happening on the ground, and then they push the state to continue to move forward. And then the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, RCRA, currently have a class action lawsuit that just made it through motion to dismiss just this week, and we're moving on. That has citizen suit as a part of the law, very important. So finally, citizens will be at the table to have their claims heard where the federal and state government have failed. And we've got some policy changes to continue to put meat on the bones of the Nitrate Reduction Act to move forward in the contamination. And we've got the reforming the Groundwater Quality Protection Act. The governor's office has taken this on. They just submitted to us an 80-page reform of the law, and we'll be in conversation with them and others to make sure that has the right details to be able to move forward. And then looking at SB 747, a fertilizer reporting bill. Super important. Let me just stop and pause here for a minute. About number of the sources are permitted by the state, how much water they can pollute. 70% of the sources of the nitrate is from irrigation, large-scale irrigation, and from synthetic fertilizer. We do not know how much fertilizer is put on the ground. So 70% of the problem, we don't even know or track. And so this is an initial bill to begin to collect that data. Very important. And then SB 80, a moratorium in Guam on expanded contained animal feeding operations. This is a group of folks that you would never have imagined come together, okay? When we do our mobilizing, when we're working with people of like minds and to come together to kind of challenge what's going on, that's a really important work. But it's also important work to dive deeper with folks who do not necessarily come together, but have common ground and can work together at this moment. Also just note that I really, every single day, try to stay out of despair at this moment. Understand what my own agency is, what my organization's agency is, and know that we need to continue to come together as we try to stumble through and continue to move forward in these challenges. Thanks.
It's on to you, right? All right. Oh, yeah. And we have Rep Aaron over here making notes on the bill numbers, so. Success!
I'm already on the grill. I'm excited about that.
I'm gonna stand because I just feel like it. It feels like a real honor to be on this panel with you all. I just want to say thank you because I'm just like soaking up inspiration, even as I'm also expected to deal some of it out too. So bear with me here. You know, I'm so grateful for y'all's attention. It's good to be with you all. My name is Damon Montstory. I grew up in the Rocky Mountains. I went to school in Philadelphia, and then I've spent the last 9 years in environmental advocacy in my now home of Portland, Oregon. I use they, them, theirs pronouns, and I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that one of the things that has concretely changed is that that statement right there is getting increasingly dangerous. And I'm not saying unpopular or political, I'm saying dangerous. Because what Trump is doing is not just attempting to like erase and criminalize an entire group of people, my people, transgender people, non-binary people, but also that emboldens people on a local level to be violent. And that is real. And I would really encourage everyone to just like, if you're not already tapped into some of that, if it's not impacting you or your local community, I implore you to please learn a little bit more about what's happening in my community because it's really just a Herculean effort some days to just get out of bed and go to work these days for us. So I just, you know, it's a bit of a somber note to start on, but like, that's real. I don't like take that off, that identity off, and then go to work and like not be non-binary, not be trans, and not be queer, right? So like, I'm getting through this and we're getting through this because we have no other choice. Like some people ask me like, would you go to Australia if you could like get permanent residency or something like that? And I say no. Even if I had that ability to do so, I wouldn't do that because this is my home and these are my neighbors and I want to fight for them. And so I hope you'll fight for me. And if nothing else, hey, they said the executive order says there's only 2 genders, so maybe that gives me a superpower and I can like be invisible and like be undetected, right? So maybe they won't notice me. But yeah, so you know, that being said, I think that really is driving and informing a lot of the professional work that me and my colleagues do now too. Is figuring out what are the ways in which we really need to step up to the plate and meet the moment here. And we've done it before. We know how to do that in a lot of ways, right? Like Trump administration part 1, they were still figuring out a lot of things, but we were wasting no time in making progress where we could. For example, with passing Portland's Clean Energy Fund via a local citizen ballot initiative, right? That was the first, thank you. If you don't know it, that was the first ever municipal climate justice fund, as far as we know, in the world, and continues to now produce about $210 million every year by taking 1% from billion-dollar corporations doing business in the city of Portland. And that money goes to support renewable energy efficiency projects, worker training and apprenticeships, and union job pathways, and green infrastructure, all with a priority to people of color and low-income folks, and people experiencing disabilities and underemployment. So like, we passed that ballot measure in 2018 in the middle of the Trump administration part 1, which is just one amazing example of what we can do even when the federal administration is just horrifying and getting even more extreme and fascist. So let's like hold on to those hopeful memories and remember that like we are capable of so much. And even as I look around this room, you know, some of the people I've been seeing at this PIELC gathering have been reminding me of some of those other, you know, incredible victories. You know, I've been seeing some folks that I haven't seen since the days we protested the Jordan Cove LNG fossil fuel project in Southern Oregon. And we won, that's right. That's right, that's exactly right. And that's a, you know, incredibly long fight, and we won a lot of our best victories during the Trump administration. Because we had state leaders like yourself who were willing to actually stand up and do what was right. So, like, that matters a lot. All of it matters a lot. And I say this because I just think it's really important to, in the face of, there's this incredible duality happening right now where it is both incredibly scary and dark right now, and we are incredibly powerful, and we cannot forget that second part. We cannot forget that second part. Yeah, clap for it. That's right, that's exactly. Never forget your power. Never forget that we have even more of it when we come together. It's greater than the sum of its parts. So yeah, Jen, just to say a little bit more about Sierra Club real quick. First of all, raise your hand if you are a Sierra Club member or supporter in this room. Yeah, amazing. See, so look around. You are everywhere, which is really exciting. And it's been great to see them come to PIELC and be together. You can be one of those people, and I really encourage you to get involved with us because we have all sorts of incredible action alerts and opportunities to do action wherever you live, Oregon or not, and we hope that you will join us in this fight because the answer to all of this peril is to get organized even more than ever before. I completely agree with you that that is our way out, right? I think your story, Kristen, really reminds us that one of the best things that can help us to heal this division is by finding what common ground we can find and then working together on that. And it's out there. It is possible. It's very, very possible. So I'm going to close my initial comments with just a couple of things. One of them is if you are not already in a union or thinking about organizing your workplace, give it a lot of serious thought. It's really important. You know, maybe you're past your working years, that's fine, but like try to find a union that can use some of your support and solidarity. Because that's one of the best ways that people can organize and get organized to support all kinds of different issues. And if your employer is doing stuff that you don't like and you don't feel politically aligned with, a union can be an avenue for you to still have a voice. Sierra Club's a fully unionized nonprofit across the country, and that's actually very uncommon among a lot of environmental advocacy organizations. And I all the time see some really heinous job postings from some of like the organizations that we work with often, not naming names here, just to be clear. But there are times when I've seen very highly skilled professional positions being posted for a salary full-time of $55,000 a year, which is nothing with how the cost of living crisis has become in Oregon. And that's frankly unacceptable. We need to be moving past that. These jobs are really intense jobs that take a lot of emotion, skill, and heart, and a lot of time, blood, sweat, and tears. And it is about time for every person who works for an environmental organization to have union protections and benefits. It's really past time. And then the other thing I want to say is that I'm going to call out another one of our peer organizations, the Nature Conservancy. Just recently put out a post where they're affirming that they will now call it the Gulf of America. And they are going to continue to refer to it as the Gulf of Mexico when they are working in international contexts that don't recognize Trump's order, but when they're working in American contexts, and you can look on their website to confirm what I'm saying. Yeah, you can look on our website to confirm what I'm saying, but they are now talking all about their conservation work in the Gulf of America, which I think violates my first cardinal rule for living in a fascist takeover, which is don't comply in advance. Right. What are you thinking? Don't comply in advance. That's how you tell power what they can get away with.
Yes.
And the Nature Conservancy is a big organization with a lot of money. And I get that they're in a different situation from Sierra Club because we get a lot of our money from private donors and foundations. So we're not reliant upon federal funding in the way that a lot of groups out there can be and are partially. But that's still no excuse. that is still no excuse. And we're headed for some dark times indeed if some of our friends are not standing up with us. So call that out wherever you see it, and support your local environmental union or otherwise. Woo!
Oh my gosh. Damon, thank you. I was going to ask the panel things like, has the freeze in federal funding affected you, and how have the firings, like illegal firings, affected your organization or the people you work with? But Damon, it feels like maybe we should just go to the how do people here, how are they feeling, and asking about that, and how are people in the community, and I think of you all as our community, how are you responding to the Trump administration? Because it is you've mentioned it being an existential crisis for a whole group of people, right? And your comment about the gazelle coming around, the kid gazelle, feels just as important for our queer kids. And so to that, rather than talking about details of our organizations, can we jump into how are we responding as a community to make sure we get through this? Is that okay, Pamela? Awesome. All right, and I will open it up. I'm sure that you all have thoughts, so if you want to have a comment instead of a question, that's really okay. You ready for this? You raise your hand.
I've been getting really defeated and tired paying attention to federal news, and I had to delete Instagram, and I'm trying to listen to NPR in a limited amount, but I want to pay attention. But I feel like there's little I can do, it's just out of my control. And so what I've been doing, I'm actually on the executive committee of the Oregon chapter at Sierra Club with Damon, and I'm a disaster resilience consultant at the national, state, and neighborhood level. And so what really keeps me going are, you spoke to, I think all of you spoke to community, but local action, we need funding for disaster resilience, and we need action at the state legislature and at the city and at the neighborhood level, but we can't do without funding. But I'm curious, what leverage points we do have at the federal level. I was disgusted by Janelle Biden's recent vote against immigrants. We knock doors for her, and she's betraying us, and it's a disgrace. And I see a lot of lack of courage from our Democratic politicians and taking a stance and defending and taking the power that we should take. And I'm just curious, we'll keep doing the local work, and that's great, and that will keep me going and hopeful. But are there leverage points that I'm missing at the federal level where, we can hold politicians like Janelle Bynum and Val Hoyle accountable?
Thank you. And also just a reminder that pressure works. Pressure works. I was a county commissioner, so I swear, when I saw 10 people in a room, I was like, oh God, what's happening? So who wants to take a front? Yeah, thank you.
I'm just going to comment first on what you said, because I really appreciate that, and it kind of leads into something that isn't really discussed a lot, but should be in context. You have policy, which is very important, right? But at the same time, and it's not mutually exclusive, there's a battle of ideas that you shape long run. So we will move past this administration and this pendulum swing, but you have contours in the long run, right, that we see historically, and where do you win those fights? And the Janelle Bynum example, I think, speaks to that. And this doesn't necessarily speak to the federal level, but I just want to remind everybody that with things going on at the federal level, we have Democratic supermajorities in the legislature of the state of Oregon. Everyone's a Democrat at the top level, but you do need to still hold your Democrats accountable when you're thinking about this battle and exchange of ideas. And I'm going to bring up an example, and this has to do with the DMV with a clerical error, registering 1,600 folks who aren't necessarily American citizens. The narrative that was put forth was like, oh, look at this failure with the way we register folks, right? The outcome was now there might be 3 folks potentially we don't know who voted, who legally shouldn't be. And Democrats just fell in line of narrative like we need to fix this system, right? Whereas to me the narrative was, hey, undocumented folks aren't trying to steal our elections. You have 3 out of 1,600. Why aren't we talking about that more? And so really context is important, and this comes to the battle of ideas, and we've ceded that to Republicans on where we should be talking about immigration. It's not an immigration crisis. This is a humanitarian crisis at our border that we bear responsibility as Americans for. We have the resources to fix this, but we're not talking about it in the way we should because we've ceded those ideas. And this is just one example. And it's Democrats doing this as well, right? And you mentioned Janelle Bynum, potentially Val Oil, right? Why aren't we holding them accountable as Democrats? We have supermajorities in Oregon. I mean, we still go 56, 57% Democratic. We have those numbers. We should be holding folks accountable at home to that. And I think that's a good place we can start. So.
I'll be very quick, which is to just say, go to your town halls anytime your member of Congress or senator comes to town, especially if any of them have an R after their name, because people are booing at Rep. Cliff Vance's town halls in Eastern Oregon over the federal worker layoffs and things like that. And like that's, if you know Cliff Vance and if you know Oregon's 2nd Congressional District, like that's the heart of conservative Oregon, and like those are places where if we're starting to see some tidal shifts, then that's really major. So keep showing up there, and if you can't show up, like become so annoying to their phone and email inboxes that they like cannot ignore you. All of these things just really directly make a big difference. So in addition to like spreading awareness, it's really good to just go directly to the source. Finally, if anyone doesn't know the bill that Simone was referring to, that Janelle Bynum voted for, it's the Lake and Riley Act, which enables the U.S. Department of Homeland Security to detain immigrants even if they are merely charged with a crime and not convicted.
That's what the punchline was going to say. So back to folks getting registered to vote they shouldn't have, and we're talking about potentially 3, maybe over 9 years. But when bad ideas win, there is a policy. There are policy issues. Let's go back to the policy. So what happened in Oregon with that is that they stopped automatic voter registration a month before the election. So my question is, given there are 2 weeks for folks to become registered to vote automatically, how many folks were disenfranchised because of this reaction to something that wasn't a real problem in the first place? So once again, that there are policy outcomes when we see these ideas, right? So.
So for those of you who are law students, and this is a law conference, I just want to say to you directly that what you're training for and the work that you're going to do is so important, as always. And in this moment, perhaps even more so, you get into some of our organizational tactics, we're turning more and more to the courts. And I am all heartened every time I see a horrifying EO, and then there's a federal judge. So it's like, that's because of the work of lawyers, people like you. So there's an immense amount of power there. The judicial system is our backstop right now, and we need to hold on to that. And I hope that gives you a sense of power and importance in what you're doing. And you're spending so much time right now in law school, and I'm so excited for what you're going to do. We need you. So thank you.
We have some more questions, but I want to make sure.
Oh, okay. I want to speak directly to the question that we just had. I'll just stand because I'm behind stuff. I think you mentioned something that I think we're all feeling, that's that exhaustion and the need to just kind of figure out how to filter, right? So that we're able to focus on the things that we actually feel like we can tune into, be part of the team. And the fear and chaos is their intention. So just naming that can be part of realizing how we can take care of ourselves, that we need to not fall prey to that.
So learn to rest, learn to build community, find the 1 or 2 action items you're going to do, with find your team and work in community with them. Love the call out for local action, and just want to underscore, don't get overwhelmed, because that is when we want to stay home, and I think we've all had those days where we're just like, there's a paralysis. So don't let paralysis set in. Keep fighting. And I think you mentioned the judicial system as our backstop. I just have to say that we have a phenomenal Attorney General, Dan Rayfield. He is being very strategic every single day on which lawsuits Oregon will engage with, and we need to make sure that he knows that we have his back and what we care about. So I think he's involved in at least 6 right now that are pretty big deals, and he meets with the AGs from a whole bunch of states, and they figure out who's taking on which lawsuit. So it's a really coordinated effort. That judicial backstop is so important right now. He is very aware, as we all are, that Oregon has a target on our backs, right? We have really important DEI, for example, policies in our education system, and we want to stand by those. When we stand by those, we risk $1.6 billion for our schools, right? The funding crisis you mentioned is very real, and it's impacting everything. So we will do everything we can at the legislative level. But a lot of my bills over time have been, how can we leverage federal dollars, right? My climate resilience in schools, school facilities bill was going to be pulling in grants from the Infrastructure Reduction Act. Well, all of that is at risk. And so how are we going to be making more resilient school facilities? What's going to happen to the Inflation Reduction Act? So we'll do what we can at the legislative level. I do anticipate that there will be funding crises and a variety of them, but I just need you to know that I both will be one of the people standing up to up for these values, and I want to uplift what Brian said about we have to hold Democrats accountable. We are going to do a transportation package that is very much at risk of Republican influence this session, and that is one of our biggest sectors in impacting climate. So holding Democrats accountable to use our supermajority wisely is one of the things I'm going to ask for partnership from everybody.
Yeah. It's more fun to speak into a microphone, so taking an extra 30 seconds, 10 seconds.
Yeah, thanks for all of this. So 2 things. One, I think now is the time more than ever for direct action, and direct action does not have to be illegal stuff. It's just like be really, really annoying in the right places and the right people. And that can be small or large. But my question is, when PSEF passed, which was amazing, our supermajority Democratic state government then passed a law to prevent PSEF-like shit from anywhere else in the state. What the hell? And now it seems like we're fighting all these really shitty laws, including from our governor gutting tree codes, pitting houseless folks in crisis against the climate crisis, and then all these nuclear bills. It's bad enough we're fighting our federal government with everything we have. I don't want to fight our state government. It makes me cry and scream. So, ugh.
I just make a side comment as I walk back that the folks on the panel then know that apparently I engage in direct action all the time, by your definition. Well, let's have a comment here and question, and then we'll take y'all through this.
I just had a comment on her because I'm Diane Phillips. I'm just a volunteer. I've never worked for anybody except for the Postal Service. And but I realized my friend here, MA, showed me what was going on when LNG started in 2005. And I realized right away, well, we need to get some opposition. And I was very, very naive, which worked to my advantage. and so I thought, if we get all those landowners together, we'll have somebody, and all they have to do is see this stuff. Well, I had no idea. I live in Southern Oregon. I had no idea it was conservative. And I found that out. So, and I'm one of those people that like everybody. So that was really awesome. And we would work really hard to get these Democrats in office while we're fighting it. And, there were all these terminals on the Columbia River that were happening, and then we had the one down in Cruz Bay. Well, you know, of course, Portland really didn't want it on the Columbia River. Well, we were the sacrificial lamb, so our state did not stand up for us, and neither did all those people. But we are really lucky to live in Oregon because Oregon is democratic. And if we holler and bitch and make a lot of noise, and it finally ended up, we had to go and have our landowners arrested in her office. And they will respond to that. So that is, you know, expect that, that's all normal for Oregon, but the system works. And so if we just keep together and at it, now the federal government, that's out of our control most of it.
Awesome. You said that. Do you all want to take, by the way, on any of those comments? No knowing what I like. But it may be a segue into talking about urban-rural divide.
I want to comment on the nuclear power thing, so those bills are up, and once again, I mentioned hold your Democrats accountable. Your Republicans are going to go a certain way, and they have the political base to do it, right? But your Democrats, there are 2 Democrats who sponsored that legislation in very tough districts. Emerson Levy in HD 53, and then Mark Meek on the state Senate side, who barely squeezed it out. So if you want to apply political pressure, those are the folks that you go after, so just commenting on that. But that kind of leads into what I view as a misconception of what this urban-rural divide is. And it's predicated on people viewing rural areas as a monolithic demographic. It simply isn't. It's very diverse. But the view that people get is, for instance, this, let's say, Greater Idaho movement, right, which is rooted in white supremacy. Read all about it from the Western States Center. They've done a lot of work on this. But if you read it, they're like, oh, we just care about these issues that we're not being heard and all these things. When really, you know, this one aspect of it is more about, you know, control of the lives of women when you move to Idaho, right? It's about, you know, this kind of model with resource consumption and exploitation. But if you look out in rural Oregon, you have multiple tribal communities who don't view resources in this way. There's more balance, right? There's more rehabilitation of wolf populations. And then we come to, for instance, we're talking about nuclear power. Nobody talked to CTUIR on this, Confederated Tribes of Umatilla Indian Reservation on this, right? And when you went into the public testimony, what was it, a couple of days ago, all of a sudden the folks are for this, like, oh, we should talk to tribes. And I'm like, why is this bill written? Because you didn't talk to tribes in the first place. So there are other perspectives out there in rural Oregon that you're not getting. So when we're talking about a rural-urban divide, remember, there is diversity of thought that is not put forward on that. We have a lot of immigrant communities who do not have a voice electorally because they're disenfranchised. So we're talking about these folks when we're talking about the rural-urban divide. And you're going to see that there's really a lot of common thinking between more urban folks dealing with some issues and rural folks when you take into account this diversity of thought. This is one of the reasons why for Tribal Democracy Project, like I said, we started with a focus on redistricting, but we realized that even with the best redistricting formats, you're not going to get voter preferences in these rural areas. And what you need is a proportional representation format at the legislative level. And this doesn't just work for tribal communities that can't get folks elected. This works for, you know, Latino communities, more left-leaning community of folks that are out in these rural areas where they do not have a voice. The representation out there does not represent them. And we're talking about like 40% of the population potentially, right, that does not have a voice. More than that. So, yeah, and I bet you can speak a lot to this more than I can. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Do you want, Kristen, do you want to add to that? But also, thank you, Brian.
Underline everything that we said, and you know, just note, Ben's had town halls last week, okay, it made national news. 200 in Baker City, 400 in LeGrand, 300 in Pendleton. We know these folks, okay? They were not the usuals, okay? They were not the small group of people who come out to Eastern Oregon to work in government or the university. That's a small group of people. We're not going to get anywhere with just that small group of people. These were other folks who are beginning to understand, who are directly impacted by what's going on. And so we really need to be crossing cultures, languages, values, perspectives, to really be standing up and holding Republicans and Democrats accountable. And I also just want to note, as folks are talking about yay Oregon and yay Democrats, I came to Oregon
because I was tired of fighting in rural red states and hitting my head against a brick wall. And I'm like, okay, midlife crisis, pick another state. And I picked Oregon. Okay, and I thought I could do rural organizing, and I landed in Corvallis. And I thought, oh, this isn't rural. This is the I-5 corridor. Okay, and oh, this is the Democratic Party. And then the Democratic Party said, hey, why don't you be the coordinator for the coordinated campaign, the rural coordinator for the coordinated campaign in West Brown, and put me in Bend for 3 months. And I'm like, oh, okay. Okay, beginning to understand rural and beginning to understand how things work here. Let me tell you, being in Eastern Oregon, we are fighting the Democrats every step of the way and fighting the administration every step of the way because we have laws on the books, but we're not implementing them. Okay? I spent most of my career trying to get laws passed. Now I'm spending my career trying to get them enforced and paid attention to. So we have to be very careful that we don't kind of slide into woe is us in our current administration. It is damn hard. Okay, this is going to be damn hard. I hope it's only 4 years. It might be longer. But we cannot kind of remember, not forget that we've got to be challenging the folks who are in leadership now to actually be putting the money where their mouth is. Okay. I also want to just maybe lift up, kind of switch a little bit. I think it's really important for us to note what's happening at the EPA. And I would love to hear from other panel members what they're hearing, what they're seeing. So if you go back to the slide for Oregon Rural Action. You know, a 30-year problem, laws on the books, no one's paying attention, no one's enforcing the laws until the EPA got involved, okay, under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And we petitioned them to intervene, okay? They slow-walked that until folks on the ground started realizing that their wells were contaminated. Okay, what happens now with that pressure? We've only gotten this far because of the pressure from the EPA. Now what happens? So it's going to be incumbent on all of us to continue to pressure our own Democratic administration to follow our laws and make sure that they are actually functioning. Another important piece with the EPA on the nitrate issue is the standard. 9 milligrams per liter. That was set a long time ago on one disease. There have been lots and lots of studies since then on a lot of other diseases. And I mentioned them, thyroid, miscarriages, cancers. In 2017, the Trump administration stopped the study at looking at reducing the standard to 3 to 5 milligrams per liter. Okay? That got going again in the Biden administration. Right now, the one program that is in charge of doing that is now been wiped out. So again, we're really going to need to kind of keep our feet to the fire locally and in the state of Oregon and not kind of get consumed by what's going on nationally. Other EPA changes that folks know about.
Well, Trump's EPA administrator Lee Zeldin is an absolute nightmare, for one. So he's a former New York congressman and has an incredibly long record of just attacking reproductive health care rights and rights to abortion up and down the ticket all over the place. So he's awful, and he was selected not because he has any environmental experience, but because he was a strong supporter of Trump during the first Trump administration. And so that's the leader, and we expect the same playbook that we are experiencing with a whole lot of other things too, which is sort of a, revisions of facts and throwing out of data and trying to kind of lessen the already really not very health protected rules that we are not getting enforced, right? So I think there's a lot of that, and then I will say that one of the hopes that we can take is that there are ways that you can sue for damages around like the lack of that information suddenly being pulled. And we're seeing that farmers are actually suing the Department of Agriculture over the deletion of climate change data under Trump administration. So I'm hoping we can maybe try some of those sorts of legal strategies at the EPA as well.
Cool. I also want to talk about environmental justice. Okay, so major headway in the last 30 years. Okay, on environmental justice. Various departments of the EPA, and most recently the codification of rules for meaningful involvement for people who are not at the table. What does it mean for our immigrant farm workers to be at the decision-making table about whether the Port of Morrow gets to continue to dump water during the winter when their wells are already contaminated, increasing continued contamination? Well, the EPA codified particular processes to do that. And we have brought that to the state of Oregon. We have environmental justice principles on the books, but no meat on the bones. So we have an opportunity, if the EPA is going to wipe out the entire environmental justice programming, as well as maybe the rules, I don't know, we've got the opportunity here to continue to move forward in the state of Oregon to put meat on the bones of our environmental justice principles. And we have a member here of the Environmental Justice Council.
I would just add to that, and Damon, to your point about information, right? So for a long time, we've had access to this incredible tool, EJ-Screen, which is a very, very powerful nationwide tool to help map environmental disparities across a wide range of communities. Gone. And I think it was completely gone day 2 of the administration. I mean, it was wild. And there were some very forward-looking folks who downloaded that data, but it is now stagnant. But I do want you all to know that the Environmental Justice Council is working on the development of an Oregon environmental justice mapping tool. So to the extent that part of our strategy is to Trump-proof Oregon, that is going to be an incredibly important tool. But the Environmental Justice Council is a politically appointed body. So to make that tool as effective as it possibly can be, we need support from communities. We need to hear from people so that it's actually responsive to what communities need, and not something that is biased in any way. So again, we need support. This we'll be asking for more funding this legislative session. I know, it's going to be a tough one. No. But to make sure we have the ability to get into community, to make sure this thing is responsive. But this is just one example of where, on the federal side, we have things falling apart, with this incredible opportunity here at the state level to build something.
Oh yeah, look at this. Are we good? Yeah.
I can always add stuff, but I want to make sure.
Okay, that sounds great. My snarky reply as I was a county commissioner of rural county was that urban-rural divide is just that people who live in rural areas live further apart. So, okay, let's see. That was easy.
Hi, my name is Matthew. I'll keep this short. I generally look long-term at stuff. So remembering back to the last big election, just over half the people who voted for Trump. Last night on the news cycle, I decided to jump over to Fox and see how they were twisting the news. And it was just amazing what they were saying. So my question is, should our organizations be talking to our neighbors more and trying to convince those 50-some% people that their values are wrong, that they need to change that, and convince them of where we're at? I mean, what's our action that way?
We got raised fingers over here. I'm going to go to down here on first, if that's okay.
I think I'm going to thread something I've been thinking about as we talk rural urban. And I love that rural is just people live further apart. Because I think of our rural communities as very diverse places. We need to talk to our neighbors. We need to build community, because that kind of conversation can also help us see the humanity in people that we might disagree with. And what I think I'm most afraid of right now is us losing the sense of people we disagree with are also human. And losing sight of humanity is terrifying right now. So yes, talk to your neighbors, because we need Republicans to understand their role in this. We need people, a lot of my Republican colleagues also talk about the value of our natural resources. So they're not completely opposed, right? So how can we find alignment? In fact, the Water and Agriculture and Land Use Committee has two co-chairs, a Republican and a Democrat right now, because Representative Owens has been actually a pretty interesting partner for Democrats in our policy. He is a Republican, but he has been, at times, really, really wonderful to work with on even environmental issues.
So we need to make sure that we find people like him, and it's not gonna be 100% that we align with him, that I align with him, but that we find those conversations and enrich those relationships, because in the end, that could help us in ways that we might not even be able to foresee right now. And then, I don't want to go with this. I think just about thinking about the humanity of people we disagree with. When Trump got elected, I had an instinct in me that I've never have anticipated in my whole life, that I needed to get my kids to DC before Trump was sworn in. And I had people help me get my kids there, because to your point about how much people make, legislators don't make very much money. It's the worst financial decision I have ever made in my whole life, and I'm a teacher. So I don't do this for fame and fortune. All right, so we're gonna be going with this. Oh, so this instinct. So I had a few people help me with their airline miles, and I got my kids there. And once you're in DC, the museums are free, and I brought my kids right away to the Holocaust Museum. And I brought my kids to the African American History and Culture Museum. And I brought my kids to places that they needed to know about our democracy, how imperfect it is, and how valuable it is. We did selfies with the documents, right? Like we were there when our 5 new congresswomen were sworn in, and they were voting for Jeffries and Johnson. I showed them what our democracy is before Trump got his hands on it fully, right? And it was an incredibly important thing. But what I also wanted them to see is that we are built on so much conflict and imperfection and supremacy mindset, and we have to be able to see the humanity in our neighbors. And that is why we started at the Holocaust Museum. I don't know that that necessarily threads into what you were saying, but I really feel like bringing it into this space.
Thank you for that. And I think it's super important for us to remember the propaganda that we've been living in.
Bingo.
And so when we're doing our work, we're meeting people as individuals and not assuming that the propaganda that they've been consuming is what they understand and believe about this country and democracy. And so it really requires empathy and not shaming. And my first instinct is to shame. And to get really angry and to challenge. I love a fight. And to challenge. But man, it backfires. It really backfires. And so it's got to be individual conversations with people and trying to understand, what happened so that you are understanding things that way. Help me understand. That old negotiating conflict management skill. Help me understand. So I guess I would just encourage that.
Yeah, and I'm going to address your question from 2 perspectives. As an individual who recognizes humanity in almost everyone, right? And then what's a political program in the long run where you actually recognize human nature? Because these are 2 different things. I think it was, I forget the programming, I'm going to forget his name, that I was listening to some public radio. And the programming had a philosopher of science from, I think it's Boston College, I forget his name. But he was talking about the 2 different realities that we live in and the assault on truth, and how this is tough to break through. And a lot of pessimism, but in the end, he's like, I do recommend as an individual, particularly with family members, you could be that lifeline for folks who are just out there, so that when they're ready to come forward, you do have a moral responsibility to talk to these folks. So that's on a personal level, right? But let's talk about then a political program based on human nature. So your numbers, you mentioned like just above the majority. I think it was just a plurality, 49% so far is what Trump got, right? And to look at what's been happening in these elections in 2016, 2020, 2024, these margins are super tight, right? So this whole mandate thing just doesn't make sense. And also when they talk about the electorate changing, they're talking about those who vote. Who votes is a shifting target. And based on that, and then this might be challenging to think about for a lot of folks, what is human nature? I would argue, and we have a lot of evidence on our running campaigns in these more difficult districts. I mean, we get wins for very progressive candidates and like plus 25 Republican advantages, nonpartisan races. It doesn't have to be partisan races. And it's predicated on understanding human nature. And I think, first off, to understand this, when someone is a racist or a misogynist or a bigot, they don't lead with that, they don't think with that. Their actions prove it, but they have other reasons for their actions. So there's a lot of cognitive dissonance with folks. And we're a mixed bag. I mean, given conditions that lead to fascism that happens historically, there are people that just are relying on fear and the worst part of their human nature, and then they say, well, the price of grapes, I'm going to vote for someone who commits sexual assault because of that, right? So you got to get into the mindset, and it's important to recognize that their human nature, we can be good or bad, and those instincts drive us, right? So recognize that. And if you look at a person of color, are you going to tell them to go to your neighbors who have fascist tendencies, or might, even though these are your friends, right? But I would never, ever put someone from a tribal community to knock on doors in places like Madras to Republicans. I would not do that. Even though, as a white person, you might know those folks and think, oh, they're great. Guess what? There's a fundamentally different feel from a person of color in these neighborhoods. So we'll challenge that notion that you can just, as a political program, reach out to folks and come together. As you forget, they go back to their echo chambers and their bubbles of these more negative instincts, where even if you have these conversations with them, they're going to go right back to the folks they know. They're still getting Fox News or Breitbart or whatever the fuck that they watch, right? They're really, sorry for that, kind of...
I started by saying shit.
You did. So it really kind of puts folks back to where they are. So a political program, I would say that you need to be looking at who are those that are disenfranchised that want to move in this direction first and dig into that rather than trying to flip votes, right? We saw Democratic turnout crashing in urban centers all over the place. One more thing, just kind of point out where we can't focus on just from respect for Native voters. Right after the election, CBS put out a poll that they shouldn't have. Overall, the poll was around 20,000 nationwide, but they took a tiny little subset of around 225 folks that self-identified natives and said, oh, 67% of these folks support Trump. When you looked at that poll, no one in tribal communities were actually interviewed for that poll. Heavily skewed to folks in the South of self-identified natives, right? The data that we look at are places where you can find aggregate data, precinct level data of exclusively Native Americans, and that paints a 100% different story. There is one precinct in the state of Oregon which fits that criteria, and that's on Warm Springs. 78% Democratic, right, compared to 81% or 82% in 2020. Mostly explained by asymmetric turnout from your more conservative folks, because you had a 10-point drop in voter turnout. Who is that 10 points, right? And that's what we're looking at, because on these margins, that is what's going to win elections in the short term. The conversations you're talking about, by all means, in the long run, yes, 20, 30 years down the road. This is why education isn't talked about enough. It's not just about, are you ready for the workforce? There's a reason why Plato didn't like democracy, right? It's because he thought everybody was stupid. So education is going to be critical, and we have to defend that line as well. If you look at folks with college degrees and look at the numbers as far as who wanted to protect our democracy, I think it was like 60, 70%, right? So this is something to think about for long run. We have to think about long run as far as where we want to win policy-wise right now. So.
Thanks for that. I'm going to be in a book club with you, philosophical, political science. Education. I think two things that we need to remember. You know, lots of folks that I work with who are young don't understand how government works or how it's supposed to work. Yeah. They just don't. There's no civic education. They've not had civic education for a long time. They don't know how it works. And so that's on all of us. And so taking opportunities to help people connect the dots about what's happening right now, that's an opportunity moving forward. And then the other is where our government has not worked for people. I was thinking, you know, this one particular issue in East Oregon. All the right steps were taken. The laws were in place, but government didn't work. And so I think we just need to acknowledge that as we're talking to people too, because they've also had that experience.
Thank you, and I know we're running out of time, so I'm just going to try to be very brief, but I appreciate the question, Matthew, and one thing I just want to elevate is that 2020 versus 2024 were very radically different presidential elections. Let's all remember that a ton of people were able to stay home and just vote from home in 2020 that might not have been able to do that, right? Like folks that were perhaps on unemployment in 2020 might now be working 2 or 3 jobs to try to support their families, and it's a lot harder to vote when you don't have your basic fundamental needs in place, right? So I think like it's worth noting that like Republicans actually Trump got fewer votes in 2024 than he got in 2020. But the Democrats got even fewer votes than Biden got in 2020. And that's because of an enormous disenfranchisement from folks in the Democratic base, and particularly younger people and real progressives are feeling really unseen by the Democratic Party. So like that's a big problem that needs to be addressed. And I actually think it's an easier problem to solve than changing the minds of a lot of Trump voters, right? I think it's an easier problem to try to say, how do we re-enfranchise and empower voters that actually are in the majority, right? Like, so that's important to remember, is that we actually are in the majority, and due to a lot of very bad electoral college and like anti-democratic shit, we had just this perfect storm that gave us this narrow victory for the Republicans. But it's not a mandate, and we can re-enfranchise those people.
One more question. Oh, yeah. Well, we haven't gotten kicked out yet. Wait, do you remember how we had to like kind of sneak in here with everybody else? We're just going to stay as long as people want to ask questions. Also, thank you all very much. But
I see the time, but I wanted to tell you, on Monday is my Vote 16 bill, because I really believe in making sure we're addressing disenfranchisement in a variety of ways. Vote by mail is one of the main things that Oregon's led on. And then I was part of the paid postage effort because I really believe in making sure every mail got to the ballot box. But I also believe that 16 and 17-year-olds should be able to vote for their school boards. And so we are having that hearing on Monday, and a few years ago we passed the civics education with bipartisan support, and that will start to be implemented, I believe, for the graduating class of 2025 or 2026.
What was the bill number?
Oh my gosh, I didn't memorize any of my bill numbers, but come to me after, I'll look it up.
that's awesome. Can we do one more question while people have attention? Yeah? All right, let's do it. I like asked and then went with it.
So I have a comment and a question. The question might need more time than we have, but the comment about how to keep going, I just did 2-3 month times in Palestine since October 7th, and I've been doing a lot of work before that. And to say how we keep going is to look at the tactical, like the strategic is really depressing, right? And we need to know the strategic and plan for the strategic, which means the long term. But there's not a lot of hope there, to be honest, for us working on the ground. So what would keep me going would be, what can I do today that can make a difference? And it might be a little difference. It might just be bringing food. It might just be bringing menstrual supplies. It might just be planning for the next thing. But that's the only way to keep going in the day-to-day when it's looking hopeless. And that's real. And I've only been back a week, so it's still really real. As far as my question for y'all who are working in the legislative process, how does it work when the state and the federal budgeting is so intertwined that you're so reliant on federal money and it's all about to be axed? I heard with maybe EPA, but it's a so what is both the tactical and the strategic from a legislative? I understand from a mutual aid process, but I don't understand how y'all who are working in the legislative process can even think of decoupling yourselves from the federal government, which if, let's just say it's only 4 years, okay, maybe there's, hope to be strategic, what comes next. But what happens if it's more than 4 years? So this is where my mind is when you all are saying, well, we got this from the feds. I'm like, well, wow, all of that might be gone soon. And as someone who is traveling with an X for their gender on their passport when all this came down, this is where I'm thinking, like, I don't know when my passport's not going to be good anymore. So it's good right now, So how would that be on a legislative basis? You have things now, it could not be there tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you for your work. I would just say that I remain pretty committed, I'm just a guy, but I remain pretty committed to this whole United States, which seems as important as ever.
A lot of that's in mind.
What legislator?
I heard legislation.
I did too. It's House Bill 3012. And then, thank you for everything you just shared. I think, and you pointed out, one of the votes we just took Wednesday, or Thursday, on the House floor was to extend some tax structures so that people continue to be able to access Medicaid. There are things that we're doing as much as we can. There will be gaps probably. Ideally, many of the things that are done in executive order are found to be unconstitutional. Ideally, Congress understands that their job is to ensure that when they voted for money to be extended to something, that it gets there. So ideally, our children's civil rights are upheld in our schools, for example. So there, as Quinn said, this judicial branch is a backstop that we have to hope continues to work. And that ideally, a lot of the funding that we're worried about will continue to flow if it's been directed to an entity. When it hasn't yet been directed and things haven't been signed, is when things are the most at risk, like the Inflation Reduction Act. So I think we can't answer a lot of the questions. I'll start or end where we started. A lot of the questions you all have are the questions we also have. We have a lot of experts that are working in teams, and we'll continue to try to do what we can to fill the holes that we anticipate and figure out kind of, again, in this conversation around, should we deviate from our DEI? No. What does that do? What do we risk when the Trump administration says then that's $1.6 billion for schools? So we are going to be making very difficult choices, but ideally we're making the right choice, even if it's a funding gap. Ideally we've got protections and that our laws in place are able to be upheld, as you pointed out, because you pointed out that so often the statute is actually fine. It's the follow through and the enforcement that's lacking. So that's one area that, it's annoying how many times we have a bill that just says follow the law, right? So we're aware of this now. I want to just thank everybody for the conversation today through the time, and I don't know if we'll have time for more, but we'll do our very best to fill the holes and work together in community.
Yeah, can we do just like 30 seconds with the closing thoughts for folks, just to respect people's time, and then they'll be here for as long as they're willing, right?
I don't know that I have too much more to say other than this has given me energy and has really helped me feel like I'm not alone. When I sit at the dais at the Climate, Energy, and Environment Committee, and we have a bill like the one that Brian mentioned that should never have had a hearing because it never had a tribal consultation, then it's nice to know that there are people out there that see the world with a similar lens and are ready to advocate and stand up for what's right.
Yeah, amen. Unionize, support unions, call your members of Congress, be annoying to them, show up, boo them at their town halls if that's what it takes. Don't just be in social media and news scrolling and news watching, but get out of that from time to time and show up or make a few calls or send a few emails.
Just wanted to remind everybody, like, there are lots of things we can do right now, short term, right? But also think about the systemic issues that got us here in the first place with voter disenfranchisement. We both kind of talked about where we think opportunities are in the short run. We're of the belief at our organization that we actually don't have a very good democracy, never have. It was built by oppressors on white supremacy, right? There are better democracies out there. And so we want to think about, we're not advocating for just, burning it all down because our treaty rights are dependent on Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution. We definitely want to keep this Constitution. However, think about, in long run, what are the systemic reforms we need to look at, whether it has to do with better democracy, whether it has to do with better education and civics education, so that we're not in this cycle of coming here again in 30, 40, 50 years, because we will. I think we're seeing the limits of our democracy right now, right? This is all, everything that's going on should be happening. But it is, and it's because this is our democracy right now. And this is, we've got some work to do.
Thanks. I am every single day making sure that I'm staying above the line of despair and kind of watching that and encourage others to do the same and continue the course and see this as opportunity, find places where there's opportunity to reform our democracy. And also know that historically, millions of people have been through tougher times, right? They really have. I don't think it on a daily basis. I have to remind myself that. And look to other movements and other communities who've been through more difficult times and often find and see how they find joy in singing and coming together. That's how I'm saying above the line of despair.
I guess I would just say, this is a moment to be tough and unrelenting and strong on issues and on policies, and to be so very gentle with yourselves and with other people. If you haven't already, I recommend Let This Radicalize You, and I apologize to the author. Thank you. But there is a great accountability question there, and I just want to say that it's okay to be sad and scared and even dwell there for a while. But this accountability question has been really helpful for me, which is, what have you built? And the thing that you build could be, I sat down with a remarkable advocate yesterday who helped create the Cascade Siskiyou Monument. But it can be an agreement, with your neighbor about how you're, sharing food. It's mutual aid, right? It's everything. It is, supporting your children. It's building something in your family. So many people have spoken to that so beautifully today. So I think it's holding all of those things together. But what have you built in its broadest conception is something that is helping to keep me on track.
Oh my gosh, thank you.